You referred in your election manifesto about changes you wanted to bring about in the scrutiny system. What changes did you have in mind?
Well, one of the major changes was that we would push things more politically, and oddly enough, as Trevor mentioned, we did push the issue of we decided as a panel we would, for example, push the issue of the jurats on the prison board. We felt we had researched it in a very moderate way. We had waited an unbelievably long time for legal advice, which apparently was going to sort of influence the Home Affairs Minister. And in the end, we lost patience, and we probably should have acted a lot sooner. So my view is bring it to political decision. We only lost that, it has to be said, by one vote, actually.
But the scrutiny system itself, did you have reforms in mind for the system of scrutiny? It appeared to me that was part of your manifesto.
Well, reforms in the sense that better resourcing. No. I would like their reports to be debated in a formal sense, because I think scrutiny itself has to be held to account. You know, well, where is your evidence? The kind of questions Trevor asked. You know, are you just confirming your particular prejudices, which we do a lot of the time, and so forth. That there would be proper debates in the States on the major scrutiny reports, and also to keep the public interest going, because quite frankly, while we do some incredibly good work, or a lot of good work has been done on very broad policy scrutiny reports, they often don't excite people. They, I think, unless there's some dramatic conclusion, unless we're seen to operate like at the moment select committees are, or the Public Accounts Committee in the UK.
If I can just come in on that point, one of the reasons people don't get excited is because there's not enough people in scrutiny, and there never was, who are willing to confront the really big issues. They don't want to do it. I mean, I didn't come to scrutiny to count dog mess on the beach. That's a big issue, but there's far bigger issues. But again, it comes down to backbone. I mean, one of my constituents said to me, the only place you'd find more chickens in the States Assembly is if you visited
KFC.
A KFC. Well, it's true. And because people won't take that on, you've ended up with scrutiny with a lot of people who they're playing at politics basically. You're going through the motions, and for every good person like a Deputy Young, as I say, I don't want to build him up too much. But if you've got the people who are just there to nod their heads and reaffirm whatever the ministers do.
But he'll come up against the same brick wall.
He will.
He can produce a nice report, but at the end of the day there's no system to act on that report, neither in the States. The press isn't really going to take it up. They might do a story about something, but they'll extract what they want, because basically the system is very self-supporting, because we've got the political system that we have. Now, I really, a penny dropped with me the other day when I went. There was a scrutiny panel going on. They had the Chamber of Commerce in yet again to discuss whatever. And I thought I'd never ever heard the finance industry being brought in before scrutiny. I've never heard it. The main industry of the island. I've never heard them brought in to discuss the merits of the finance industry. Yet Chamber of Commerce are there, arguing for their small businesses, coffee manufacturers, coffee sellers and so on. But the big business in the island is never brought to scrutiny. Why is it?
It's probably because of the people who get elected to the panel which is responsible, and that's another issue I wanted to touch on. You know, you say I'm a person of the left, and I am, but because of the system we've got, where you have the establishment allowed to vote on the scrutiny chairman, it's very difficult for the left to then lead scrutiny. So what you'll see is just a head nodder, basically. If a Deputy Southern puts himself forward, or Deputy Tantia, Deputy Higgins, I mean, we've seen the results. They're immediately portrayed as it's not true scrutiny, it's opposition, which completely negates their whole position.
But even, you see, Deputy Valois repeating the same thing about wanting to engage with the public and get things. I asked for a list in the end of 2010 of public submitted topics. There were 67 topics submitted. Very few of them were actually adopted. And of my own topics, I think I've submitted my own name a couple of dozen topics. I've never yet been invited to appear as a witness before a panel. I've had some very marginal. There was a particular case about abuse at school. There was a particular case where I was involvement. We went through a complaints board. I dealt with that. I was invited. I was sitting in a panel one day, and they were talking about radon, which is still, years later, it's still grinding its way through the system. And they said, "Would you like to say a few words?" And I said a few words, but it was totally unofficial, unrecorded, and so on. And this is the way. And I've submitted dozens of suggestions, and some of them have been accepted. Taking up the one on respite care, I asked for a whole inquiry into respite care. They reduced it down to children and young people, and they had some fabulous witnesses come in, and it was almost, in a sense, hijacked by the autism lobby, but there was a perfectly valid, excellent witnesses that came in. But the whole question of respite wasn't really touched. Now, that was what I was asking for. That's out of a couple of dozen topics that I brought in, but I wasn't allowed to speak on it. I wasn't invited to say, "Have you got anything?" He didn't ask me. Now, this isn't engaging with the public. For whose benefit is this public partition really supposed to be? Is it just window dressing?
I think you're completely right, and you are at the mercy of probably whoever the dominant voice on that panel. I mean, a similar issue, which you're obviously well aware of, was the scrutiny being filmed by citizens' media. Ludicrous. Some of us supported it, and to be fair, myself and Roy both supported that happening. But we're in a vast, tiny minority, if you like. That's not contradicting myself. Yet why? And it's gone on and gone on, and it carried on right throughout my term on scrutiny. No resolve to it at all. It's because people, they want to take up the issues that don't rock their boat, I think. I mean, I think you could sum up Jersey's scrutiny position, where we still are, is the experience we had when we went to Wales and we saw the Welsh Assembly. Lovely, shiny, beautiful, assembly, but basically discussing issues that the UK government felt were threatening. That's what our impression was.
But the point still remains, Trevor and Mike, if a group wants to do it, they could do it. They could look at major policy. And you ask about reform, Mike, another thing I would have gone for is, as Trevor said, more balance. Because I think it's good for people to challenge each other. It's good to have people on panels who've got active minds, who've got a bit of an edge to the way they ask questions. As an example of a good study, which probably didn't divide people, but it was good, it was vulnerable children. As with the case you instance over respite, we had some excellent witnesses. There was a bunch of real political sort of a mixed political bunch on the panel. Trevor and I were on it, Jeff Southern was on it, Alan Brecken chaired it. It was really good. We worked hard. We had two excellent academic experts from the UK. We hadn't realised, but we were told later, they were the two top people in their respective areas. We were doing it very quickly because we needed to get to the States a report on the subject, and within about 12 weeks, I think, the whole thing came together. It was an excellent example.
And yet, what happened to that report?
Well, obviously, actually, and maybe I compromise more with the system than Trevor, because I go along with the maybe the Karl Marx saying, we found out what the problem is with the system. The issue is now how do we go about changing it. I think, and it's only incremental. Yes, I can't say, because we know we work in a system which does not like big bang change. We're very much faced with bringing in change incrementally because of the kind of issues you've just described. I think gradually it is being implemented. The whole issue, for example, of getting the children from the moment of birth and providing the right kind of support. The whole issue of dealing with the early years education system. Now, I'm biased because I'm now in education, but focusing on that a lot more. The whole issue of bringing independent inspection of children's services in various ways and all that. These are things we talked about which weren't hardly ever being, they certainly weren't being talked about at that time. We brought them forward.
They have been talked about for many years. I mean, it's rather like anti-discrimination legislation has been talked about for many years, in fact. I mean, they've been talking about rights of the child and the way that children should be, the administration should take place. It isn't a new thing, and it's been discussed many times.
Yeah, but it's a new...
At scrutiny, and it has been discussed at many times.
No, I think I wouldn't minimise it. It's new in the sense, Mike, there may have been all these conventions, but we have seen in authority after authority. We've seen in the Irish government, we've seen in the Catholic Church, we've seen bodies who allegedly had all these things in place, but when push came to shove, there were some awful things happening under the surface.
the health minister, since the last elections last October, has appeared before scrutiny 13 times, hearings. They've had some private meetings as well, but 13 times hearings, and I think I've attended virtually every one of those scrutiny hearings, because I have, in the last 4 years, attended virtually every scrutiny hearing.
Yeah.
So I do know what's going on in this ridiculous system. Now, she, with her advisor, she generally brings a team of 6 with her, and she repeats the same thing every time she comes to the different scrutiny panels that she meets. And the issue of respite is an issue that's been ongoing since they've had their inquiry and they've had their report. And I can tell that basically the system is not changing. They've done their report, they've done a good report insofar as it went on children's respite, or the respite in connection with children and young people. But it didn't really get it, because basically, as we know, because we're on different economic times, the money isn't there. They can talk themselves around the houses for days and days, but the money isn't there anymore. They're not going to add resources to all these systems because they claim not to have it the way the economy is divided, because it is user pays market economy. This is the way they think, isn't it? They're trying to privatise these things. They're trying to minimise centralised costs, and this is the theme. And they can do what they like. It's not going to happen. So I get the minister coming back 13 times, basically saying, dressing it up in different clothes, but basically it's the same message. It's not going to happen.
Can I pick up on one thing that Roy said, that it'd be open for a group of members to look at something? Well, I don't actually agree with that. I mean, I've put to Deputy Massor, who, as we know, is not here now, a huge issue that his panel should be looking at is the problems in our justice system. We've allowed for the last 14 years an individual who was quite happy to put the good name of a college before child abuse. Now, there's huge flaws in that system from top to bottom. Deputy Massor won't touch it. I've offered to come in and support and be part of that panel, but no, they won't touch it. So you've got too many people who won't touch the big issues. So it's not going to change, and the things that you want to look at, rightly so, because they fly in the face of the user pays, the writer's political view, they're not going to happen. And the result has been perhaps what they wanted, that people like me have withdrawn. Now you've got people who will just go along even more with the status.
The correspondence with our Deputy Le Herissier, especially about talk about the topics which I personally put in, other members of the public have put in, the public involvement in this. There's no capacity in the system for taking on extra subjects. So topics come down from the states, and even those are replaced. The other day there was a demand for 2 things suddenly came up within the same week. One was the police headquarters and the other one was Le Masries. Both of those immediately went on the already existing agenda for the subcommittee of looking at planning. So that entire quarterly meeting with the minister was almost entirely taken up with those 2 issues. In other words, they jumped the queue above other equally important things, possibly.
But you've got to remember, Mike, some of these topics are symptomatic of wider issues. For example, I've talked about with Deputy Young, I know from the moment he came in to the House, he made it clear that he was unhappy with aspects of the island plan. Now, I raised a question last week about why isn't he running a scrutiny on it. The reason is I'm on the planning panel, actually, and we're desperate to hear from him. We're desperate to get another point of view. And he happens, okay, he's got to manage his conflict, as he was told last week. He happens to have a lot of information. He knows how government works. He's been in it for, many years. And I thought, this is fantastic. This guy's coming along. Get a balanced panel, because as I said, he's got his conflicts to handle, and he can really give us some good information and some good feedback about what's right and wrong about the island plan, and by extension, although there was actually a very detailed examination last year, but it was done by a guy from the Planning Society, and it might be advisable to broaden it out. The planning process. So that would be a way of looking at the Le Masries case, I would have thought.
I'm going to stop here.